All right. Welcome to Digineer Presents Organizational Change Expert Panel, Leading Change into the New Year. And today we are honored to have a panel of change leaders to shed light on what change will look like this year and how we can get ahead of our change initiatives, considering the current landscape that we just talked about. So I'm Shannon Rose, a senior change consultant at Digineer. I also have David Cole with me. He's also an organizational change consultant. And we are both going to be co-hosting tonight. So I'd like to start by introducing our panelists. Doug Reynolds has held CIO, COO, and president roles in companies ranging from 20 million to 8 billion in revenue. He is a committed driver, passionate about finding innovative ways to coordinate activities and deliver commitments on time and on budget. Doug's core goal is to work with organizations who are experiencing breakdowns that are delaying achievement of their business objectives and help them implement a new set of practices to reduce waste and improve their ability to meet their challenges quickly and effectively. Next, we have Jim Grassman. Over the past 30 years, Jim has played a huge part in driving innovation and growth across multiple technology platforms and roles. Jim is currently at Optum, where he has been an instrumental technology leader, driving quality and production control, among other things, for Omnichannel, which is United Health Group's primary contact center platform. Jim now resides in St. Paul with his wife, Alice, and two amazing daughters. And his passions include communication and cycling. He believes that to solve any problem, you need to start with communication. I couldn't agree more. Carol Fletcher is a senior organizational change management consultant with over 15 years experience leading change efforts for Fortune 500 companies in IT, e-commerce, finance, nonprofits, and healthcare. She has a passion for change management and a drive to help others better manage change in the workplace. Carol has developed methodology, approaches, and execution planning for change management offerings and initiatives that focus on the people side of change and has been with Digineer for more than 10 years. Gus Broman is a communication consultant who brings clarity to complex and changing organizations. He has over 20 years of experience navigating change in various industries, including IT, healthcare, and higher education. He's also been an adjunct professor at Bethel University for 15 years and has been with Digineer for over 9. So I guarantee with this lineup, there will be plenty of lively conversations and maybe a few laughs. I don't know. So if you have any questions along the way, please utilize the Q&A function. It should be at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be happy to answer those questions at the end of our session. So let's get started. Thank you, Doug, Jim, Carol, and Gus for being here. I'd like to start by going around the room and answering one key opening question. So how were you first introduced to organizational change? How did the experience go? And what was the role you played in that early change? And Doug, let's go ahead and start with you.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you. So my introduction to org change management was on the negative side. It's my first corporate job. I had worked for a number of small family-owned businesses, but my first corporate job was with this little insurance company called Prudential. And I think it seemed to us at the time, because I was sort of pretty much entry level, that they just did downsizing and reorgs for sport. As an example, one day they came by and said there'd be 2 lists, and if you're on one list, you go into the cafeteria / auditorium at one time, and if you're on another list, you go in at another time. And what we found out later was list A was going to stay and list B would be gone. And I just remember how poorly that was handled from an employee standpoint, that the lack of respect, the lack of compassion, and how poorly it was communicated, because we never did understand exactly why we were going through this hassle. Nobody cared about those of us who were survivors, to sort of care for our needs when half of our friends were walking out the door. And it was Something that I really never forgot. I think my role, I was a peon observer, but it was really a watershed event for me. Frankly, I have learned most, it's kind of sad to say, most of my leadership practices by watching it done really poorly. And this was no example. I learned so much from watching how it just wasn't done well. It seemed very little planning, certainly very little communication, no empathy. And so, and I contrast that with a number of years later when I had to be part of a relatively small, but a downsizing at Allianz. And at that time, we brought in OCM help. We brought in a lot of professionals that knew what they were doing. We over communicated. We tried to be as respectful as possible, treat people with respect. And in that instance, at the Prudential instance, people left going, this company's stupid, blah, 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 blah. The Allianz example, well over 75% of the people who were affected by that downsizing said, if anything ever happens, give me a call. I'd love to come back and work here again. So I think there's a huge benefit, and I hope that's sort of my indoctrination, and both good and bad to org change management.
Yeah, I think for me, again, if you want to talk about the first time, I was at West Publishing, my first job in technology out of law school. And West Publishing was acquired by Thomson. And the thing about getting a job at West Publishing back in those days was nobody got laid off. It was a constant job. It was very secure. There was no change. All of a sudden, this major change, and it was a big one. It really sent shockwaves. It was a privately held company that now was going to go public. And I think over time, as I stayed there, instead of being afraid of change, we saw a lot of good things that happened. A lot of opportunities opened up for a lot of people that may not have had it. I like Doug's comments around observing negatives, right? So fast forward to a couple of years ago, learning what other companies have been at or engaged with, things that they did wrong, mistakes that they made. I took a role within Optum a couple of years ago, joining Omnichannel. And we're in the process of transitioning off of one platform onto a new platform. Major change, affecting hundreds of people. And looking back on the different experiences that I had, it became apparent that we really needed to put in place a program that not only addressed the new technologies and the training that would be required for that, but also making people comfortable and understanding that they're going to have opportunities on the new platform, that this shouldn't be looked upon or considered a threat to their career, but rather an opportunity. So how do we reach out to them, keep them engaged, keep them curious, keep them motivated, and understanding that this really is a good thing, it's a growth opportunity. And that's really when I became front and center within organizational change management, where I had a leadership role in helping pull together and bring in help from Digineer and others to come up with a program to support the training, to support the education, to build morale and build trust, and also make sure that we have people learning the new technologies and can support them.
What about you, Carol?
Interestingly enough, I think developed an awareness of the need for change management years ago when I was working for an organization, and I had been there about 9 years. And in 9 years working on projects, I had never seen one project successfully implement, one large scale project ever implement correctly. Most of the time we ended up in litigation trying to get out of contracts and spending millions of dollars, and Doug's laughing because you know how that goes, right? And then we were given a new project that was to rebuild a rules engine for a mortgage company. And I was told that, we're going to put all our money into doing this. It's going to be great. It's going to fix everything. Everybody's going to love it. We're going to do this. And I said, I'm happy to help out, but I won't do it unless we have change management. And I knew about 3 business articles worth of information about change management at that point in time. And I had a boss who said, great, I think that's an amazing idea. And we've decided you're the change manager. And I went, what? So it was a little bit of baptism by fire in learning how to do change management, doing a lot of self-education. At the time, I had a wonderful boss who just really supported it and challenged me and kind of helped me work through it. I was really happy when I left the organization. We implemented that project on time and on budget. I couldn't believe it. It was the first time I had been there that had occurred. And actually, when we did the first rollout, the business team we were rolling out to said, well, this was a waste of your time to even come here on our first day using the system, because we knew what to do and we knew how to do it. And we've just wasted your time asking you to be here. And so that was my kind of litmus test for the difference that change management can really make on projects and in the workplace.
For me, I was brought in as a communications person on a project, and they were outsourcing IT, and they're like, hey, Gus, you go talk to all the business departments and figure out what their priorities are, and then you come back to IT and tell us what we should do. And I was like, well, how is that communication? Well, you're communicating with those people, and we read that they need to know what's going on. And what ended up happening is, as I went back to IT, they really didn't know what the decision was. They didn't know what the project plan was. And so I spent most of my time working on the project management side of things to crisp up those deadlines and then communicate it to the stakeholders. And it was a really eye-opening for me, because the phrase change management didn't really exist. But when you're told to communicate, yet you don't know what to communicate, you have to start further upstream. And since then, you know, that the change management has really become more understood in recent years. And now what I really cling to is just being open, honest, and transparent. If you have those three things, people will understand that there's reasons that we're going through these changes. I had a recent client, and just real frustrated IT lead, and he's like, Gus, go change manage Lars. And it's like, this isn't hypnotism. This isn't like a drug or something, a spell or anything. It's just being clear and communicating. So that's kind of how I got into the field of change management.
So you're saying change management is important. If I learned anything from the answers. All right. Let's go on to our next question. So in your opinion, what is organizational change management? So your own personal definition, and how do you qualify the need for it within your organizations or projects? And so, Carol, you want to kick us off on this one?
Sure. I've always kind of defined change management as a planned approach to change. It's really thinking about what's coming to you and planning ahead for it. You can't figure out everything that's going to hit you, but really taking time to plan how you're going to roll things out, how you're going to communicate, how you're going to train, how you're going to engage people to make sure that you're helping them through change. So change is really about people and how they're being impacted by the decisions we make as an organization and the projects and the efforts that we are working on. When I look at how do you qualify the need for change, it just depends on how your organization already manages change or how you as an individual manage change. Change is good for a lot of people. You know, getting married is a joyful thing, but it's a big change in life. But we all go into it, you know, very enthusiastic with a good attitude about it. It does require some help sometimes, but a lot of times when you have a change where people already are excited about it and moving forward to a new future, that change typically happens a little bit easier. It's when change is tough that it's really hard, and then people really need some help getting through it. And a lot of change in the organization, it can be anything from new technology to a reorganization of the company that requires a change manager to come in and just help them through that, those hurdles there.
So what about you guys? Gus or Jim? Doug, you got something?
Yeah, I think simply anytime that you have a change inside the organization that affects even an individual, it's org change. Now, that doesn't necessarily take a lot of management. You know, I could move someone from desk A to desk B. Probably don't need to spend a lot of time. Might want to at least tell them why and give them a heads up, but you don't need to manage it, as opposed to projects that are where areas are heavily interdependent. The longer the duration, obviously, I think the more need for a framework and a true management structure around it, and an intensity or intentionality about how it gets introduced. I think about a big legacy conversion that we went through at Starkey a couple of years ago, where we were impacting people across the organization. There was virtually no part of the organization that wasn't impacted in one way or another. And the practice of really stopping and thinking about how are these pieces interconnected? How does moving this piece affect that piece? How do we help people understand and prepare for these changes over a fairly long period of time? Quite frankly, it was a long series of changes across the organization. And then so the intentionality and even planning for things. Yeah, we all talk about communication. I think that's a basic must. You can't over communicate. I heard Jim say that before in some discussions we've had. You can't over communicate. I completely agree. But at the same time, you have to be purposeful in that communication. You have to really think about what is it that these people need to know. What is it that what do they care about? And the framework of change management brings a much better a better focus, and even planning for disruption. A good change plan, rather than waiting for something to break and then scrambling trying to figure it out, a good change plan has already considered that and has contingencies for how to get things back on track. So to me, the more pervasive the change, the more people involved, the longer time frame over which you implement that change, all of those are the factors that go into deciding the level of rigor around your change management effort. And frankly, I'm just happy there's people like Carol and Gus that make this their career, because it can be a bit daunting when you get into these big projects.
I had a client, and I've actually quote him many times. He would get so frustrated in these projects and nothing really got done because it was just a grind for him. And he's like, the only thing I can finish is a beer after work. And change was just so frustrating for him. And that's when it was fun that I got hired, because I was like, hey, I can help this guy. And his one goal was, he said it in one sentence. He's like, I just want a great experience for my customers on day one. And I anchor back to that. And I was like, yeah, that if I just use that as a mantra and go back, okay, what is it that we need to do to make it a great experience on day one? And you keep anchoring back to that. But then in the posture of, as you're going through the change, it doesn't matter how much time and energy and planning I have in the whole thing. You have to have the countenance of humility and wanting to help when the poop hits the fan, because no matter how much you've planned for, there's something that comes up that you didn't expect. And if you have this countenance like, oh yeah, that's not my fault. No, you got to like roll up the sleeves and go, oh yeah, let's get after it together. And so many people just really understand that, and they're really forgiving, and it really creates a esprit de corps on the team as you're walking through those changes.
Yeah, I think, I agree with most of what I've heard, all of what I've heard actually. Change is constant, and you have to be able to embrace it, and you have to be able to address it with the framework, because sometimes, like we've said, it's going to be a big change. Sometimes it's going to be a little change. But what you have to have in place is that communication infrastructure. You have to have trust, and an engaged workforce, or your teams need to be engaged and understand and know they're going to understand, or at least be told why something is happening, whether it's big or small. If an organization isn't good at doing that, or sharing information, or has an issue with transparency, it really, really does impact productivity. And in this day and age, I really think you can't overinvest in this type of program because we're trying to get more from less. And the levers you have to pull are fewer and fewer. So you really have to make sure that you have that engaged workforce that's curious and trusting and believing what they're being told, and things aren't being held back from them. So I think, to answer your question, Chin, I think it's always needed, change management.
So change is constant. It requires trust. I love the words humility and humanity, Gus. Nice work on that. And it's worth the investment. So those are some of the key things I heard. We all know that 2020 has changed the way we work, right? And the way we approach change. It's changed us all as human beings. I know I'm different forever because of it. How were your in progress early 2020 change initiatives impacted by the pandemic? What were some of the details? Which were some of the ways that it was impacted? Let's see here. Doug, let's go ahead and start with you.
Sure. Well, at Starkey, as you can imagine, the majority of our consumers, our customers are our intermediaries because they're actually audiologists, but the end consumer, by and large, is 65 and older. That's the age at which most people start to have a need for a sophisticated hearing device. And think about what happened to that age group in the beginning of and continues through the pandemic. This was the group that was told, sequester yourself in your house, don't go out, you're most vulnerable. And consequently, they did. And of course, what that did to our business was we could see a significant drop off in demand initially, especially as the pandemic hit. So that was in many ways it was a wake up call, quite frankly. We had to reassess what we were going to do relative to capital spending, and we had to cut some, or probably better put, defer some capital projects until we had a better picture of what things were going to be, because remember how chaotic it was. Nobody knew what was going on. We had to rely on move a little bit more away from a fixed workforce to more of a variable workforce, and that was an interesting transition in the middle of the pandemic. How do you onboard, and how do you culturally bring alignment in a virtual world? And so that was a big one. And then of course we, like a lot of organizations, we had to go through furloughs and even some downsizing in our global workforce. And as painful as that was, it needed to be done for the health of the organization. And finally, I think even things like virus safety, we still had to make hearing aids. We still had demand. We actually had a backlog, and we still had to make hearing aids around the world. So we had to figure out new plant safety and how did we introduce changes to that environment to keep our production workers safe in the factory environment. So it was a very, very, and we're no different than any other organization, a very, very challenging time. And I think you can see examples of where change management really played a part in helping to solidify how we move forward as one organization. So really, and Starkey is a mission-based organization, right? People care very much about hearing health and hearing health globally, and many of us, are there because of the contributions we can make to that. So it has to be framed in a way that helps people understand the health of the organization. The way that the organization will address these concerns is all in line with our mission to continue to provide hearing health. And so while, look, there were some tough discussions, that's part of not everybody was going to be there at the end of the day. But when you put it into the context, help people understand, as Jim said, contextualize and make it real for them. That certainly was a big part of making this whole thing work. And not everybody's going to be happy with the outcome, but I think at least you need to be authentic. You need to be very respectful and help people understand Why are we doing the things we're doing? And try to tie it together. When you have that much change going on at one time, there's no part of the organization that isn't impacted. So how do you tie it together into a message that makes sense from a top level all the way down, mailroom to boardroom? That was really one of our big initiatives. And then, just as an example, I'll give you an example, a very tactical example that we have been working on. The Congress passed a law that said that for the first time ever, Tier 2, Class 2 medical devices, hearing aids, could be provided over the counter. Now, what they didn't do is say how that was going to be done. They left that to the FDA. So we spun up an entire new business unit to start to look at how do we bring forward the sophisticated product that we have in an over-the-counter setting, and it was quite a challenge. Well, guess what? The pandemic hit. The FDA shut down. They weren't going to rule on anything, and we knew that. We knew there'd be a year where the FDA basically said, "We're not doing anything. Go home." Well, we had a whole business unit spun up. So now we had to spin it back down. And again, that had massive impacts to our suppliers, our partners, and our internal employees. So just as an example, there was just massive amounts of change. And frankly, one of the parts that was hardest to deal with is nobody had answers, right? Nobody knew, is this going to be 3 months? Is it going to be 9 months? Is it going to be going into 2021, for gosh sakes? I think the lack of answers and the ambiguity even made it more critical to try to stay close to people and do what we could in terms of managing the change.
So maybe the pandemic needed change management. Hey, Jim, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, for us, it was interesting. When it hit, we were full stride, really hit our stride on this major migration off of one major platform onto another. All of a sudden, everyone has to work from home. For us, that meant tens of thousands of agents, literally, are now going to be taking calls from their home versus call centers. And not only in the United States, but across the globe, other countries. So we had network issues to consider, bandwidth issues to consider. How are we going to measure this? How are we going to find latency? How are we going to resolve incidents and understand really what the problem is? So it took a lot of focus that we hadn't really anticipated for a completely different paradigm, doing that on the fly. Second major thing for us was the need from local and state governments support in handling and communicating different things around COVID, whether it be getting information out there, setting up a call center to answer questions. Now we're dealing with getting appointments to have your vaccinations. How do we condense timelines? Because if we're going to do a migration, when we started this, we're looking at 2-3 years, right? Now we're being asked to help some state, local entities do things, within a weekend or a week. How do we, A, communicate that to our teams? B, how do we condense these timelines? How do we keep people motivated? How do we keep from burning people out? Everyone's at home now. Everybody's on 24/7. We have to make sure that we're not just running people into the ground, because you have some employees that just want to do more and take on more and take on more. So you have other serious considerations taken in mind. So how do you monitor that? How do you make sure you're just delivering on these new extreme situations? And that's not the day job, right? We're still having to deliver on these migrations, and our targets aren't going to change because there's a lot of cost benefit that's baked into business cases that are approved to do major migrations. And so for us, it was just really pivoting our teams and looking at different ways to approach these new challenges and also deliver on our existing challenges. So for us, it's been pretty extreme, but we've been very successful, and I think we've done a lot of really good things across the globe in supporting these groups, local entities, whatnot, in being able to provide more support and information. So, and a lot of that was because we had a great, change management communication plan that we've been building out just to support our major migration. And having that in place really helped us embrace the opportunities that it provided us because of COVID.
Well, when COVID hit, I was actually working with a large healthcare provider that's also a research institution. And the project I was working on was trying to get healthcare intellectual property, wrap it up into a product and sell it to doctors. And so we had gotten through all those approvals, and the business plan was all set to start the product launch, and then COVID hit. And so the question was, how did COVID affect you? Well, my engagement ended that exact week. The contract was cut short because they were letting go all the consultants. So I was done. But what was quite cool is that because that product was all queued up, ready to go, the organization said, look, we're in a pandemic. We need to communicate better. So instead of selling the product, they started using the sources and the platforms that we built to actually announce it on the website. What's new about COVID? Do we wear masks? Do we not wear masks? Things were changing every day. And it was very cool for me to see that here it is on the platform for everyone to consume for free, because we need to get through this. And at the same time, I was, chatting with another person who worked at the organization who was trying to get vendors on board quicker. How is it that we can get vendors approved? None of us are around. And so, I ended up keeping in close communication on that. And that's actually the project that I'm working on now. So it's one of those things where everything changed on a dime. And as a change management consultant, it's kind of cool because the rest of my career, we could always anchor back to 2020 when everything had to change. And you don't have to use a false metaphor or sports or anything. You could just use the thing that we've all been living through. So
I think the interesting thing about the pandemic and change is that it's the first time probably in the livelihood of change management where the entire world got hit with one single change all at the same time. And that has created some challenges for organizations. I was in healthcare at the time, and typically how change would roll out is it would be a top-down approach. You would have executives, administrators who would have changes, we would roll them out, and it would be that top-down approach. Well, now everybody got hit with the same change at the same time with very little time to prep. And so we ran into a lot of different challenges that we had before because some leaders really pivoted well. They were able to think quickly, they were able to respond quickly, they were able to go, this is our new situation, this is how we're going to deal with it. Other leaders kind of fell apart because they just didn't have that program to follow anymore. And so from that regard, we saw a lot of really interesting leaders just kind of shine and show up more than we thought they would. In other instances, it was a little disappointing at how some leaders handled the change. But going forward, I mean, obviously, I was working in healthcare. Healthcare changed dramatically overnight. You went from having hospitals and clinics full of patients to only treating patients with COVID, and the challenges that occur there. And how do we support family members who are no longer allowed to go in and be with a sick and dying family member? How do we help them stay connected in an appropriate way? And so a lot of projects that were in flight immediately ended, and we evaluated what we needed to do, changed gears, and kind of moved forward in that direction. And I think a lot of people think, well, healthcare probably was very successful because this is a healthcare issue, but healthcare still lost a lot of people on furloughs, a lot of people laid off. A lot of people now working remote, where in healthcare you rarely worked remote. So a lot of challenges occurred there that had to be dealt with almost on an individual basis sometimes. If you're asking somebody to work from home that lives in a remote area and has a difficult time getting internet access, that's different than having somebody who works in the cities who has internet access very easily. And so we were dealing with different challenges that we hadn't expected as well. And had to learn how to pivot quickly and manage change and communicate quickly and effectively.
Yeah, Carol, if I could add on to that, I think one of the things you said is everybody was hit with the same change at the
Yeah.
time, right? Which was unprecedented.
Right.
But a couple of things have come out of that that have been, to me, rather fascinating and frankly reassuring, which is, take it into Starkey, we're a global company. We've been used to dealing, face to face over a computer. Now, granted, we needed to bump up the size of some pipes and add some licensing for some of our remote workers, et cetera, et cetera. But that was sort of minor. But the transition from okay, I'll have a virtual meeting with someone who is in a different city, a different country, whatever, to the only way I'm going to have a meeting is virtually. Overnight was, I'm just really amazed at how well people made that transition. And really, when you look at it, I mean, think about it. Managers were freaking out. How am I going to manage people in this environment? I don't even know if they're at work, and all of the sort of noise that came out of it initially. And yet here we are a year later, and the transition, in my way of thinking, has been phenomenal. I think it really shows very well on the workforce, on how people show up, how serious they take things, and their ability to adapt has been, in my opinion, just phenomenal. And I can't honestly say that I thought a year ago we'd be sitting here talking about, it's not a non-event, but how seamless that transition occurred.
I agree, and I really think it goes to the human spirit and their willingness to adapt to what we need to adapt to. And it also goes to, technology jumping in quickly when we didn't have all the best tools maybe for connecting. Other technologies really responded. Again, it was a global response to a global change, which was really interesting to see. So from that perspective, I think we've learned a lot, and things have probably changed for many organizations going forward because of this that may never have changed or been very slow to change. I know we found initiatives that we had been fighting to get across the finish line for a year that all of a sudden they went, turn it on next week, and so you have changes that you're dealing with there, as well as just making sure that you're taking care of patients and their families as they come in.
I've never met so many of my colleagues' kids before. You'd be
Right.
there and all of a sudden, boop, the kid shows up and it's like, man, look at the footy pajamas. Do they make those in a men's XL? A lot of humanity came out during this, and it was really interesting. And people became more patient and understanding, and so it was really unusual in that regard as well, because like you never really saw kids in the workplace, but now you did. And it was a little bit of a window into everyone's personal life as well as professional. And candidly, that helped in some of the organization, and like, hey, here's the time that I can meet, and then we had more people just, we were telling people, like, just go and deal with your personal issues, and come back when you can. And people really respected that. And then they stood up to that as well. That was really neat to see.
So since we're on the virtual topic, I'm going to skip ahead one question. But, as we're talking about going virtual, maybe we can just touch on those who haven't, or you can elaborate a little more. Maybe we can start with Jim on the experience of going virtual. What was your role in that? How was it seamless? What were some of the key things that you did from a change management perspective that really, really helped?
I think in my situation, working for an extremely large organization that's spread out internationally, we already had a lot of experience in working in that way. But now everyone was working in that way. For a time, some of us are going in the office, but really that you come to a realization, I'm the only one in the office. Why am I driving halfway across the Twin Cities to sit in be one of 3 people, right? And so pivoting to that situation where now you're not seeing anybody, you're not having those bump in the hallway conversations where you learn something really, really valuable. So one of the things that that I haven't cracked this nut yet is how do you replace that? There is tremendous value in having everyone in one room, right? And that even though we were so spread out, we were very good at bringing everyone together to have meetings every so often. That hasn't happened in over a year. And so it's a struggle, and I don't have a good answer for it, because really we're communicating constantly now, more than we did before, ironically, right? We're not seeing each other or even anyone, but you have we're on Teams now, so your chatter on Teams is there, your mobile phone messaging is there. Your computer is set up by your bedroom. You wake up and the first thing you do is check that, right? So you've got this constant 24/7 ability to connect with folks. And so I think our work days have extended longer on the top and on the bottom and into the weekends and that type of thing. But not so many of those sort of aha moments when like I say, when you bump into somebody and you have a conversation that you weren't intending to have, or you ask a question you didn't know you're going to have that chance to ask. That's the one thing that I'm still trying to figure out. How do we get to that point in this when everybody's remote? Because we've all read stories, I'm sure, about how what's it going to be like when we come out of this, right? We're going to probably have more of a work from home workforce across the board, right? So that's the thing that Shannon, for us, like I said, we were well positioned to deal with this just because we do all the time. Most of our Scrum teams aren't even in the same location before COVID hit. But it has stressed us to have just everyone working from home and not together, and that ability to touch base.
I think for us, I've actually seen more happy hours now than I've ever seen. I would have ever gone to, like, in the office, because so many people are kind of looking for that connection, like you're talking about, Jim. So many people are looking to connect with their peers and their coworkers again and have that sense of camaraderie. And so they're looking for different ways to do that. And some of them are virtual happy hours. And I know a lot of people on our team during the summer would meet at a coffee shop and sit outside and have a meeting, because you could actually do that. And it was nice to connect with folks. But it takes a lot more intention to be able to do things like that. You have to think about it. And you have to be proactive about reaching out to others and not just waiting for somebody to connect with you. And it's been, I think, a challenge for managers to communicate that effectively, even to their teams, to say, don't wait for somebody to reach out to you and tell you what they're doing. If you need something, reach out to them, connect to them, use Teams, use chat, use whatever tools you have at your disposal to make that connection and to stay connected to others. I think the biggest challenge is, if you're sitting in an office situation, the overhearing a conversation and going, hey, I need to know more about that, let me go talk to them, doesn't occur. And that's where I feel we have a big disadvantage. And I really felt it initially until I realized everybody's on the same level playing field at this point, right? We're all at a disadvantage to do those things. And so I try myself to reach out to people more, just to let them know what I'm doing so that we can have those conversations that might have occurred more organically in the office.
Yeah, unlike Jim, I don't keep a computer in my bedroom because, dear God, nobody wants to see me before my first cup of coffee, I guarantee it. And probably more importantly, I don't want to see anybody else before my first cup of coffee. But as a global company, as Jim said, we had the technical infrastructure in place, and we had been using it, I would say, sparingly. But in Starkey's case, we're a hands-on company, right? I mean, the audiologist touches your head, and so we're a hands-on company. We're a mission-based company. Our mission, so the world can hear, and so I think that just naturally our culture gravitated to being in person. And even when we had meetings across the world, our leaders got on planes and went to the facility and had meetings in person. It's just the way this organization grew up. And consequently, even our top leadership was really kind of poo-pooing working from home. It wasn't frowned on openly, but it was like, it wasn't encouraged. And the revelation that came a few months into this, when months had gone by, nobody had been in the office, and guess what? Productivity was actually as high or higher. It was really an interesting transition. Culturally, it was really interesting to watch that take root in an organization that had been so focused on face-to-face interaction. So just a little bit different, I think, than Jim's experience, but a lot the same in terms of some outcomes and where we got to. And like you both brought up, that lack of camaraderie, and you can do happy hours virtually, and it's a way to stay connected. It's not quite the same though, right? So I talk to people all the time that say when they really want to get back together in an office. And by the way, I don't think we're ever going back to working. The post-pandemic thing is probably the days of 9 to 5 days a week in an office are probably gone, right? It's going to be some blend. I think we've all talked about the hybrid model, the blend, but I do think people want to get together in a location and be sort of proximate occasionally to keep that bond of fellowship sort of strong.
So when it comes to, so I've heard a few different things. That I have so many notes right now, but I loved the idea of this intentionality and this proactiveness of staying close to an organization, especially during times of extreme change or chaos, right? I know in change management, we have certain tools for that, right? Audience assessments, and we go through a litany of those things, but we usually only do them once or twice. Now it's just about the listening to an organization in those micro and consistent ways. So I really like that recreating the water cooler conversation, how critical it is to still find ways to listen and being intentional and proactive about it. If I were to sum up your guys' conversation, I'd say those were some key takeaways for me. So let's fast forward. Here we are, right? We came to the end of 2020. We are all in change. So we're all working on change projects or change initiatives now. What do those look like? How has your approach to change changed? And how are you looking at your new projects differently? Let's go ahead, Gus. You want to start?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say it's differently, but it's just so critical that you really clearly communicate the why. I mean, it's so many times I hear the foot soldiers like talking down about the executives, like, they don't know. And it's like, and I'm always like, time out. Why do you think we're doing this change? Like, there's no one that comes in and says, I want to make a decision so everybody else's life under me is hell. Like that's not a thing. And so you have to unpack the why, and the why can't change. So if we're changing what we're doing to reduce expenses, that's a reason. Then you remember that reason and you don't change that reason. Because then if you came in and said, and increase sales too, like, no, you have to stick with the major why, because then they'll understand it. And Carol alluded to it earlier about how people like change. They love change. I got married, I had kids, I've moved houses, like I love it. Now, if Doug says, I'm going to change this to Gus, I'm suddenly not excited about the change yet because someone's putting change on me. Well, then when I understand the why, and if you're open, transparent, and rational, then I'll get it. It's like, that makes sense to me now. Now I understand because I like working for this company and I want to continue working for this company. So the why is to cut expenses. So it sounds so easy and fundamental, but the messaging changes sometimes and people get that and it really bothers them. So, and then the other item, so you communicate clearly the why, And then you also kind of like start understanding like what's in it for me type of thing. Like, how is this going to be and how will this affect people? And you don't give them the Pollyanna crap. You're just really rational, but because sometimes change can be good, you know, and just as now in this time of working from home, I get a snack every day. I get pickled herring and a Triscuit. I never got that before, but I'm a hyper extrovert. I miss people. I want to get out and see it, but I get happy every day because I get a little pickled herring and a Triscuit. So just, but anchoring back to the why and what's in it for me, for those people who are going through that change is just paramount.
Pickled herring and a Triscuit. My brother
Yeah,
makes pickled herring.
I know it's nirvana. You are welcome.
Thank God you're virtual.
Hey, Jim. So what new change initiatives are you working on, and how has your whole approach to change changed?
Well, I think, really what I've tried to do is almost double down on using what we put in place in terms of communicating and the communication, I've called it infrastructure a few times, deliberate readouts to my org or my teams, and really made sure that my direct reports and myself are, in this instance, ironically or coincidentally, getting with Shannon and David, who we've engaged over the past year or so. And, they can attest to the seriousness with which I've taken this and held my direct reports accountable to coming up with, fresh content, a deliberate, structured approach to organize, when we get together, some people call them town halls, that type of thing. I'm not real fond of that term for whatever reason, but making sure that we're doing this. If we say that we're going to do it in 3 weeks, we do it in 3 weeks. And we make sure that we don't do the same thing that we did the previous 3 weeks. It's different. It's based on feedback that we're getting from them, the things that they want to hear. And it's been very successful. My organization is very good at doing employee surveys and engagement assessments. And we have 2-3 years back with these teams that we have, and we see these scores increasing. We see attendance increasing, which is remarkable because we certainly aren't taking work off of anybody's plate. If anything, we're putting it on, more and more, expecting more out of folks to try and meet some of these deliverables we have. And it is very encouraging to me to see attendance increase and to see responses to our surveys that we put out, getting more questions, more specific questions, that things that they're starting to see that we can address them. We want to understand, stability is a big topic for us, right? We're call center technologies, contact center technologies. We have to be up, right? We're 24/7. That's a big question we get from our internal partners, and, we used one of those forums to address that and really empowered everyone within QA, the Scrum Masters, production control, to have those conversations with their peers, and it's helped a great deal. And it makes them feel more part of the organization. So I think, to sum it up, it's doubling down on it and making sure that we have those metrics in place that we can see improvement, because more time is more money, and also taking it seriously, because it can be a double-edged sword. If you put something structured in place where you're doing a town hall every 2 months, but you're not putting the time into it, it turns people off. It's almost like, it's not worth our time, right? So take the opportunity to make it fresh and timely and build engagement, because it builds trust. So that's what the big difference really that I've tried to do to address this complete work from home across the board. How do we stay connected? How do we deliver on, higher expectations?
I can attest. So what you're saying though, I mean, really focusing on your people, engaging your people, and making sure that they're cared for during this time is helping the work outputs tremendously.
It's the most direct way to show you care and you're empathetic. And you want to hear from them, and you want to make sure you're addressing what you're hearing from them with good, solid answers and transparency. I can't think of a better way to do it.
I love it. Carol?
And I totally agree with that, because what we're seeing too in healthcare, I work in a patient experience area. And while we've always kind of looked at what is the employee experience that pairs up with this patient experience, that's getting more scrutiny now than ever. So as we're working outside the office and in our homes, and we have different distractors and we have different things coming at us that we've never had in the office, we're trying to take that into account as we're making changes to support the patient better. Some things that are positive that have come out of it is we do have some people who are like, hey, let me work 11 to 7 instead of 9 to 5. That works better for my family life or for my situation. And I can actually support my constituent better by doing this and making that adjustment. And so we're finding that some of the lines are blurred and a little more fluid, and some are much more constrained. And so understanding really what your employees are going through, what their situation is, and how that impacts their work and the work that they're doing outside your organization with external partners is really more important now than ever.
Doug, any last words on the topic?
Well, as you said in my bio, I have a real passion for implementing practices. I'm a big proponent of commitment-based management, something that Digineer is very familiar with. And it's been a really fun time because it's a framework that applies itself beautifully across virtual boundaries, right? And to Carol's point, some people, do you really care what, frankly, at the end of the day, do you really care what hours people work? No, if they meet their commitments on time, why would you, and okay, call centers, there are jobs you have to be there at a certain time, I get that. But on projects and on a lot of the kind of work we do, you don't really care as long as they meet their commitments. And so how do we make sure the commitments are clear? How do we make sure that they're well negotiated? How do we support people in this virtual world? And when I say manage, I use that very loosely because you're not like top-down managing what they're doing. You're just giving them some support and the communication to make sure that they can meet their commitments and do that on time. And then, organizing the daily stand-ups or whatever routine that you recommend, but giving them a voice and keeping them connected and aligned to what the project and what's being done. So for me, this has just been so much fun to see. I've been a big proponent of commitment-based management, used it everywhere I've gone. And the way that it just seamlessly gets inserted into this new virtual world has been just a ton of fun.
So we're coming down to our last two structured questions, and then we'll get into some audience questions. But what advice would you give leaders, right, or managers who are trying to carry out organizational change during this time? What's one or two pieces of advice you would give them? Gus, you want to go ahead?
Yep, I still anchor back to the why. So make sure you really stress that and be consistent. And the other thing is consistent communication. And without this like swinging by and being able to have those drop-ins, to really be consistent with it. One of the other positives is that introverts can now speak and have more time, and I always make sure that on my teams, just me being a hyper extrovert who's really annoying, I want to make sure that the introverts have that time to talk as well. And now that we're virtual, it's a little bit easier, but I really encourage leaders to say, hey, make sure you're reaching out to those quiet people who are on this call. Because one, you got to make sure that they're engaged. And two, a lot of times the processors, it just takes longer for them to like articulate, develop the thought, and then respond. Whereas some of us annoying extroverts are always just popping in and saying that. So once again, anchor back to the why, and then make sure it's an even playing field for those on that virtual platform, because you want to make sure that you're managing their expectations and really tapping those analytical thought, people who are processing it they have really good answers. And most of the time they're better than my answers. It's just that my answers come quicker.
Yeah, I'll jump in too. I think as leaders, and I use that term not on an organizational hierarchy, not on an org chart, although there certainly is a certain level expected of people at certain levels in the organization, but leaders can be anywhere in the organization. But during change, when you are the person that people look to as, quote, a leader, it is my opinion, it's your obligation to ground them in the future, right? And during the pandemic, things were changing and still are changing so fast that it's not like you can BS them and say I have the complete answer, but giving them as much grounding as you can, communicate. We've said the word 1,000 times already, communicating with purpose to help them see it's the leader's role is to communicate a vision that provides ambition and confidence in the future, right? The leader should be providing a vision that creates confidence and ambition for the future. And that's in times of high stress and high change, but it's not impossible. And I think that's what leadership to me is in times of change. And, and frankly, sometimes you have to give bad news. It's not fun, but to be authentic doing it, respectful doing it, as Gus said before, you ground them on the why. It's not always going to be rosy, but there's a way to do it that still respects the individual. I remember I've coached a lot of people through the years on performance management, how to do effective performance management. And the one thing I always tell them is, because they'll say, well, I don't want to give them that bad news. It's like, look, if you respect them enough to tell them the truth. And I think that's a big part of being a leader in times of change.
I think that you're spot on with that in just making sure that people understand what's happening and being authentic and honest. I always say, give good news fast, give bad news faster, because the longer you wait, the worse the impact is on them. So if you get to review time and it's the first time your employee has heard that they're not performing up to par, why haven't you been talking to them for a year about the performance or about challenges that you've run into? I also think that we also forget that a lot of times people are just tired of change. They're just exhausted by it, right? There is tremendous change fatigue going on in the world right now. Even people who are change managers get tired of change sometimes. And that's happening right now. And really being aware of your employees and what level of fatigue they're hitting because of this. If you're talking to somebody who's, single, living in, their own home, and it's very quiet and they're in the cities and they've got great internet, that's one thing. If you're talking to somebody who's got 3 school-age kids that they've been trying to get online and homeschooled out in a rural area where they have very bad internet, and now they've got 4 people all day long on the internet, that's a different situation as well. So understand kind of where they're coming from, but also try and help them connect the dots back to what's in it for me. I love Gus's give them the why, but sometimes you have to give them the why me as well, because they forget that sometimes these large initiatives actually came from challenges that individual people have run into. And so taking time to find ways to connect the dots back to here's the pain point you've been exhibiting or you've been talking about, and now this is the solution that we're bringing in hopes to alleviate some of those pains. People really want to buy into change for the most part. I mean, if you give them a good excuse, they're more likely to get on board with it. And really just thinking of your employees, your people, your teams, and how they're going to react to changes, and then how you can help soften that for them and help them understand it and then adopt the new change as easily as possible.
What about you, Jim?
Yeah, I think I'll maybe reiterate some of the things I said, but primarily, create the opportunities to engage. I mean, that's your plan, right? How are you not doing that now? How can you do it better? So create those opportunities and then spend more time than you think you need on how you're going to handle it, whether it's a one-on-one, whether it's a group presentation, that type of thing. It's an opportunity, and it can go one of two ways. So over invest your time in making sure you're prepared for it, and then lastly measure it. Have something in place where you can try and, as objectively as possible, measure, has this been successful? Are we seeing better survey results? Are we seeing more productivity? Whatever it might be. But really, I would just, the opportunity to engage is, I think, the big lever we're going to have to increase productivity as we come out of COVID. And, we're going to see some, interesting economics and such going on out there. So how best do we motivate and build morale and keep people engaged and feeling comfortable and curious? I think it's finding those engagement opportunities and then taking advantage of them and executing on them.
I love it. This is such a heart-centered discussion. The why me. I love leaders hold ambition for the future, authenticity, the idea of change fatigue. Jim, you talked about, spending more time on engagement, and that actually benefits us all in the long run, and measuring. Those are just incredible takeaways. So last question from me, and then we'll look to the audience, is looking into 2021. What is one or two things that you are most hopeful for about your work and or your life in 2021? And Carol, let's start with you.
I think the thing that I am most hopeful for is we've seen so much resiliency of just the human spirit through this pandemic. People who I looked at before who I thought were not going to be able to manage change at all really stepped up. Others who maybe have been good change managers in the past were leading initiatives where they'd never maybe stepped into a leadership role. So as we look into 2021 and going beyond that, I really hope that we hang on to that spirit of resiliency and of we can get through this as long as we're working together to get through it. So that's really what I hope I see in work life. I also hope we see that same resiliency and that same willingness to connect with each other personally as well. I know there's friends you want to connect to when this is all over and family members that maybe you couldn't fly out to see. I would love to see all of that open up and those relationships to get a little bit of a jump start. I also feel like we're going to appreciate each other more than we have. And I'd like to see that be a global thing. But I really think the resiliency that I've seen has been really touching to me. And it's really made a difference in how I work and how I look at others too. So I hope that continues.
What about you, Jim? What are you most hopeful for in 2021?
For me, it's more around the kind of discovery of what we're going to see. What did we learn from this experience that's going to change the way things are once we come out of it? There is going to, normal is a constantly changing thing, right? We know we're not going to go back. We never go back to the way it was at whatever point in the past. There's always things that have changed. I think the accelerants, though, that this has brought on, how is that going to be reflected in, social situations? How is that going to be reflected in business situations and office situations, that kind of thing? The whole work from home concept has always been very interesting to me, how the pendulum swings back and forth. When I started out of school as a professional, working from home, that was, you didn't even know what it was. It didn't exist, right? Maybe it did in some, corners of here and there and everywhere, but not where I was, at least. And kind of all of a sudden more and more people are working from home. And then all of a sudden, nope, we're going to pull everybody back. We're not going to do it. And then this hit and it just shook everything up. Are we more productive because there's nothing else to do? There's nothing else to do but work, right? Is that the reason? Are we going to see it, all of a sudden everyone's going to have to run back in the office here in 3 years? But, that's just one example. I think, this is amazing. Everything that has changed, everything, every angle and degree of our lives changed. So how is that going to be when we come out of it? We don't have to worry about, I can't even imagine not wearing a mask, right? But that time's going to come. How's the world going to be different? So that's, not necessarily answering your question, but that's kind of what I'm anxious to see, right? Looking forward to, what's next.
There was hope in your answer. So
yeah, during this time I had a son, and it was right when the governor shut everything down, and he's like, "Hey Dad, I'm going on a first date, but what do you do if you can't go to a sporting event, a movie, a restaurant? She can't come to our house and it's 100% chance of rain. What do you do on a date?" I was like, whoa, that's a good one. So he drove around and got takeout and ate in the front seat of his car as he did a progressive dinner, and I'm seeing that. And I have another son who's starting a PhD program. He can't even visit the campus. It's a virtual tour of the campus. And, and what I've learned is I need to have a high degree of tolerance and ambiguity in my life. You got to have a high tolerance for these things and pass it along to your kids. And I too am hopeful. I can't tell you how many times that my colleagues and clients are saying, "Hey, when can we raise the glass? When can we be in the same space together? Like humans were meant to be together." And so I look forward to that as well. And I also understand that some of these people who have really been adverse to change are embracing it, and we're moving forward. So both personally and professionally, I see having that high tolerance. And for me, it's been a joy because I have a short attention span. And so it's fun to always be changing and having to adjust and flip on the fly. And I'm learning so much from other people. And I'm learning to reach out more because some of these people just really understand life and their situations better. And it's just been a real fun, challenging time. But boy, I'm ready to get back and enjoy people's company. And my wife is ready to have me leave too. I'm not for good, just for a couple hours.
what about you, Doug? What are you most hopeful for in 2021?
Well, I'm most hopeful that I'm not invested in any commercial real estate properties, because I think, to follow up on Jim's point, I think that would not be a place to be right now. I just don't see the future where we're going to rush back into big office settings. And I think this hybrid, some form of a hybrid will be here forever moving forward. Now, I could be totally wrong. It could be a pendulum and could swing back, but it's hard to see how that would happen after this. And frankly, I've never been one who really believed in this balanced life thing, but I do believe in a blended life. And I think that this whole thing that's happened and the practices that have come from it have really helped us in that regard. Maybe to Gus's point, maybe too much blending at times when we'd like to be interacting. But clearly, I'm very hopeful that the future work environment and the future way we live our lives that whole blended concept is going to be much more fruitful. But the thing that one thing that I'm very hopeful for is that people in all parts of the organization, all kinds of jobs, I've really come to appreciate people that I wouldn't say I didn't appreciate them, but let's just say they weren't as prominent. So I'll give you an example. I came down to in January 1st, I came down to Arizona and left the locked down state of Minnesota. And it took about 2 hours to be sitting on a patio at a restaurant. And it was this amazing concept. These people came up and they brought you things. They brought you food, they brought you drinks. It was fantastic. And I say that sort of tongue in cheek because I never realized how much I missed that. It's like, this is fantastic. And I missed I really, this appreciation for these people who come into work. Sure, they're wearing a mask, but they're putting themselves at risk. they're there and they're serving you stuff and they're happy about it. And of course, now I never forget to say thanks for being here and leave bigger tips as a result. But just that understanding of, and it's not just that job, not just the server job, it's so many of the things that people do in your organization all the time. Once you start really looking at it, the appreciation you have for their effort to, as Carol said, whether they're out in the country with 3 kids or whether they're in the city by themselves, show up, make a difference, find a way to contribute, regardless of what they do. It has been really, really fun to see. And I'm hopeful that we start to appreciate a broader suite of people and all the contributions that people bring.
I love that. So the constant learning, we're hopeful for fun, that will continue to appreciate and show gratitude for those who are risking their lives for us, but also those that are contributing to helping us all, get through our work environments, restaurants, and the simple pleasures. And making sure that we take a lot of the learnings that we have and carry them forward. And finally, Gus, I love yours. When do we get to cheers again? So, we have some questions from the audience. I'm going to read them through, and whichever of our panelists would like to chime in, maybe one or two of you could answer them. So our first question is, are there any best practices for managing resistance or those people who are really, really against change?
I'll jump in if you don't mind. My experience with people who are resistant to change or the biggest naysayer is not to push them away, but to actually pull them in. What I find in my change management career is that many times the ones who are complaining the most or most resistant to change do have some valid reasons why. And if you can peel back sometimes the anger and the frustration that you're hearing from them or the negativity, sometimes you do find some real good nuggets in there of things that actually needed to be addressed that everybody's been kind of avoiding talking about or bringing up. So my advice personally with those naysayers is to actually pull them into the change process whenever possible. The first engagement the first job I had doing change management, I had several managers who did not even understand the concept nor buy into it. And so when I asked for somebody who could act as a change agent to work with me through this initiative, they gave me a person who was already on a personal improvement plan and was given 90 days to shape up or they were fired. And she was very knowledgeable, but she had the worst attitude in the whole company. And at the end of a year of working with her from the change management perspective and her learning much more about how to do this appropriately, a year later, she actually got a raise and she was just really thrilled. She was moved up a little bit as well. And her manager was like, I don't know what's happened to her, but this is a different person than what I had a year ago. And I've seen even in healthcare where I'm working now, working with a team of engineers who were like, we're supposed to be working with the business, but nobody wants to work with us. And I said, by the end of this project, we're going to teach you guys how to manage change, and people will not know how they can live without you. And that was the transition that occurred with that team, is they went from being the one that was marginalized to being the one that was included on every project because of their expertise. So really, I say don't shy away from them. Find a way to pull them in if you can.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I mean, I think oftentimes that comes from a feeling of not being involved or not, sort of being victimized by a situation. Turn it around. Help me solve this problem. How do you create a situation where they have skin in the game, right? It's on them. They have accountability to solve this thing that they don't think is right. That's I agree with what you said.
Yeah, I have a son who is factually correct probably 92% of the time, but how he says it, I want to punch him in the face. It's like how you say it also matters. And I see those people in the workplace as well, where I just think they're against the change. And then I sit down, I said, okay, pretend it's like your son, like just bear out, be a good listener. And boy, those people have saved my bacon. I did not know, but it was how they said it that everyone hated them. And so really press in on those people who are adverse, because they might be saving your bacon because they're seeing it from a different angle. They just say it in a crabby way.
All right. Another question we have is, I have dealt with many companies that only seem to embrace change management when they encounter an issue. How, as leaders, have you elevated change management from a reactive practice, helping at the project level, to a more enterprise-wide solution designed to get in front of issues before they even turn into problems? Jim, it looks like you're thinking.
Well, I think it goes back to making sure that you have an objective way to measure whatever change management program you put in. And if you can show those kinds of results, you build momentum across your organization. You probably already have something in place, like if you have an employee survey or something of that nature that you can build off of. So you already have a pre-existing baseline. But it's, anything that you're putting money or time into, if you have clear objective measurements that, there's buy-in and people really can't disagree or argue against them and build on that. I think that's where we've been successful within, my omnichannel organization and bringing this forward and pushing it forward and getting really first other parts of omnichannel engaged and involved in what we're doing, and now opportunities to go broader within the organization.
Yeah, I'll add on to what Jim said. It's really important to measure. It's important to get more formal, if you would, feedback in ways that you can act on it. And it's really important to do that routinely, right? But it's really important that you close loops. So it's one thing to ask people and they give you honest feedback, and you can, to help you understand what people are thinking and what their concerns are, and be active in managing the changes, even without project level stuff. But if you don't, and you can even deal with it, but if you don't circle back and close the loop and let people know, we heard you, here's what we did, how do you think we did, and is it enough? Too many times that's what I see. I see the initial effort's great, but we don't close the loop all the way around. And I think that's really important.
Any other advice on how to shift an organization from being reactive to change to being proactive to change?
I think
Gus,
Gus
you're on
and I
mute.
probably run into it a little bit too. I think because we get brought in for an initiative when an organization needs it more globally than just that one initiative that we're brought in. And a lot of it, at least my perspective is, a lot of it is educating managers and educating individuals as well. So whenever I have an opportunity on an engagement with a client, I will take the time, whether it's my lunch hour or whatever, to go over why we're doing change. What are some of the things that you can do, even if the organization doesn't adopt a change management approach? What are the things you can do in your own job that help you manage change better? Because if an organization has a group of people who can manage change well, first of all, that group of people is going to be very successful in the organization, but you'll also find the organization starts to lean on them for those skills too.
All right. Well, I don't know about everybody else, but I have a litany of takeaways and notes. And on behalf of our panelists, Doug, Jim, Carol, and Gus, and all of us here at Digineer, I want to thank you for attending tonight. As a takeaway, you can find the recording for tonight's panel and all previous Digineer webinars at digineer.com and on our YouTube channel. And please follow our other social media networks for other great content and future events. And if you have any questions, please reach out to your fellow Digineerian or email us at info@digineer.com, because we're here to help and we really do care. So without further ado, be well, be good to one another, and have a wonderful weekend. And thank you for attending.
Thanks. Cheers.